Maybe the most powerful force in the world is just believing that something is possible.
Do you have any advice for anybody who is struggling to find their own personal purpose?
And you see it in how I was documenting my life at the time. I was taking photos of my despair. Because in my mind, it was this interesting stepping stone to where I was going. And you see this person who just believed that this was a moment in time on his way to something else.
But most people also don't realise that that's the journey you have to take. They don't realise the hard graft that has to go behind it.
You understand the value of anything, including yourself, by the context in which you see it.
You definitely didn't narrow yourself down and label
I tried
yourself.
not to. I tried to throw myself into discomfort.
Welcome everybody to a very, very special Meet the Author with an author that doesn't need any introduction. I'm here today with Steven Bartlett, who is the mastermind behind the Diary of a CEO podcast. And more recently, he's written a fantastic book, which while I was reading it, I was sending pictures all the time to my team. I was literally like, there's this bit and this bit and this bit. I absolutely loved every single chapter in the whole book. And so I'm really excited to be quizzing you today, because normally you're quizzing other people. And so I can't wait to sort of glean information from you and quiz you about your book and your podcast. So thank you so much for being here today. You have started your own marketing business and podcasting business, and you've got your own publishing company, and you're tackling inequality and entrepreneurship. And so you don't have much time. So I wanted to say a big thank you for giving up your time today to be with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's start from the beginning before we sort of dig into the book. I would love to know a little bit about your childhood. And you talk in the book about your family, and in particular you talk about your mum. And so I'd just love to know about your mum and the inspiration that she's brought to you, and a bit about your childhood to start off with, please.
Yeah, I think there's two things that are really sort of important for me in hindsight, and two dots that I connect that I think are really pertinent to who I am and who I became and what's driving me or dragging me. And I think the first one is I'm the youngest of four siblings, and I think sometimes young siblings are treated slightly differently in certain ways, and I've tried to find some of the research on that and spoken to podcast guests about it. But for me, what it meant is there was a bit of a transition in my childhood where when we first came from Africa, I was born in Botswana, my mum was born in Nigeria. I'd say we were a middle class family. I say there was excess sort of cash, surplus cash in the house. But then my mother started several businesses, and those businesses didn't work. And I think the context there as well is my mother left school at 7 years old, so she can't read and she can't write. My dad was working away in London, so she was raising four kids effectively on her own. The businesses didn't work out, but my dad was funding them, and then eventually it meant by the time I was about 10, our really nice sort of middle class house was really dilapidated. So 6 foot high grass, fridges in the garden, TVs at the back. Back of the house was knocked down, but just remained knocked down for the last sort of 10, 15 years. And this is all pertinent because you understand the value of anything, including yourself, by the context in which you see it. People make their decisions with like a menu or when they're buying a TV based on the other options available there. And as that relates to self-esteem, when I was a young man, we were the only black family. We were slightly strange in many ways. I remember one day my mum coming to pick me up from school in her lingerie because she wanted to send a message to the other kids. And I'm contending with all these things. Then I'm contending with us having no money. Then I'm contending with us not being able to bring anyone back to my house, no friends ever, because I'm so deeply embarrassed. And then I have this huge amount of freedom, because my mum then at about 10 years old, 10, 11 years old, her corner shops start taking off a little bit and consuming more of her time. So my dad's leaving his job and going to her place. And at 12-ish years old, if I wake up, they're not there. And if I go to bed, they're also not there. And that means that you've got shame and freedom. And with shame and freedom, for me, what it meant is I started running experiments to try and get rid of my shame. And for me, the biggest cause of shame apparently was money. So I started selling things, and I started starting little businesses, and I start doing the school trips at school. Gets to the point by sixth form, I'm responsible for pretty much all of the school trips. The vending machine deals in the school were done through me. So I find the suppliers, I negotiate the deal, and the school gets free vending machines, but also profits on every sale. And that's what I'm doing at 16 years old. It means that I get expelled for not attending my lessons, but then I get unexpelled, as Mr. Sprinkle said on that TV show, Would I Lie to You? Because in his words, I was making the school money. So they unexpelled me. He said to me, when he unexpelled me, he ripped up the letter from Mr. Thompson that said, you're kicked out. And he said, you're my little Harry Potter. I keep you under the stairs because you make the school a lot of money. It's exactly the word. And I've been back to the school twice to speak. And every time I put up Harry Potter in the stairs, and he's at the back of the room going back and... But that was my early upbringing, and it meant that I was I remember at 16 years old, like realizing that my grades weren't going to be good enough to be a success in the context of how my brothers were going to be successful. I knew I wasn't going to be able to be successful in that regard, but I looked around at my peers and thought, for some reason, I can get them to come to my parties. I can get thousands of them to come to a party at a nightclub down the road for an under 18 event within 9 days. So these people will be the peers with me. So when I'm an adult, I'll organize stuff and I think I can get them to come. And that was, in my mind, it meant that I no longer needed education, because from first principles, these would be the adults with me, and I've been able to sell them things and get them to come, so I'll do that when I'm older. And actually that was a great belief, but it was also meant that I kind of gave up on education. I did actually go to university and I lasted one lecture and then I left and I cracked on with my first business.
What was the university course you went to go and do?
I went to Manchester Met and I did business management, assuming it would be something like the movies, assuming that they would teach me something about business, but in that first lecture, it was like they gave me a piece of paper and crayons and it was like, think of a hypothetical poster for a business. And everyone was asleep and pissed and drunk, and I thought, this is school again. Oh my God, this is what I'm bad at. I'm bad at sitting there. It turns out I had ADHD and I didn't know. I'm bad at sitting there and focusing. So I never went back. Called my mum, said I'm dropping out. She said, if you do that, we'll never speak again. And we spoke a couple of years later, but I understand why she said that. And in my maturity now, I go, well, my mum loved me, and in her life, education was the thing that she feels held her back. So when one of her kids called her and said, I'm not going to get an education, something that she wanted so much, she thought standing in my way was her way of protecting me. But I think in the modern world, education comes in many forms.
And it's not unusual for entrepreneurs to drop out of school or university. I mean, my dad's a prime example. He left school at 16. What did you then go on and do? So did you feel lost when you left university, or did you have that instant idea that you wanted to go and do something?
I think that the most important thing that I had, and I think it came from having that independence when I was super young and then being able to run experiments. When you run experiments, what you build is evidence. And this is what a lot of kids are robbed of. They're robbed of evidence. They're robbed of the evidence that they can have an idea and execute it from beginning to end. And the greatest gift I had is I started building evidence at 14 years old, that if I have an idea for a vending machine thing or a trip to Alton Towers with my school or a end of summer party or Halloween party, I can have the idea. I can then do the work to get the consent forms together and the t-shirts we're gonna wear. I can print off these tickets, and then I can collect money, and then the thing happens. And that is what self-belief is. Self-belief is just evidence. It's evidence that you do or do not have yet. At 14, I was so lucky that I managed to build evidence. So at 18, when I dropped out of university, I can't tell you that I was scared, because I wasn't scared. I just totally, and you see it in how I was documenting my life at the time. I was taking photos of my despair. I took photos. There's photos of me taking photos of the CCJs that I had. I got 2 CCJs. I'm opening my fridge and I'm taking a photo of the fact there's nothing in it. Because in my mind, it was this interesting stepping stone to where I was going. I was going to be a dragon on Dragon's Den. And this was all just, it was a fascinating thing to document. And in my diary at the time, which is online, and because I used to keep these little Facebook diaries, private notes on Facebook, you see the same thing. You see this person who just believed that this was a moment in time on his way to something else. Really dumb in hindsight. Like really deluded and delusional in hindsight. But I think there's something to be said for maybe the most powerful force in the world is just believing that something is possible. And I was given the gift of that. Honestly, I can't tell you many other talents I have than just that macro tailwind of just believing that things are possible that most people around me at the time didn't believe. Because what then happens is you're more likely to run an experiment, more likely to fail, more likely to get the feedback. And the feedback is knowledge and skills. And your life is ultimately then defined by the uniqueness and the value of the knowledge and skills you attained. So my gift is I had a really high rate of failure at a young age because I had self-belief. And that means that I've acquired skills now that are really interesting. So yeah.
Well, it's amazing to hear your thought process, because I think entrepreneurs have a slightly different brain to other people who go through the classic system. And I've always been so intrigued by the entrepreneurial brain. My dad, as a family, we're still trying to work him out. Do you think that entrepreneurs are born, or do you think that they can be made?
I think both, and I think especially in the times we live in, where there's so many ways to be an entrepreneur, and it's so much easier to become an entrepreneur. and to reach global audiences because of the internet and platforms. But I think it's really both. The way that the system's kind of been set up historically, and I think even in your dad's era, was you either succeed in school or you're either a failure or an entrepreneur. And I think that's changed now, where you can go to school, you can learn about something and decide at any point in your life to become an entrepreneur, and it's seen as it's celebrated more so than it was in the past. But one thing entrepreneurs have in common, really great entrepreneurs have in common, is they're just really high conviction about something. And they're willing to absorb the risk in the pursuit of that thing that most other people disagree with them on, because for whatever reason, because of their trauma, because of their childhood, good or bad, they believe that thing is both true and it matters. And sometimes the reason why they pursue that option is because they have no other choice. And I think maybe if my brothers weren't so smart, I would have been okay to carry on through the academic route, but they were rewriting the GCSE textbooks because they weren't hard enough. They were rewriting the A-level text. My brother got 100% in all of his A-levels and all of his GCSEs and was on the front of the newspaper. And I'm there like falling asleep in the lessons and with 30% attendance. Can barely spell still to this day. My maths is not good. I love my brother. He's my older brother and I always respect him. He works in our business now. He runs my investment fund.
Well, you need all different brain types in the world,
Yeah,
so
exactly,
that's why it's so
exactly.
important.
So I started this business called Wallpark, which is essentially a student notice board. And as that business was, one of the ways we were marketing that business was building up these large social media channels. This was at the same time that the Lad Bibles, the uni lads of the world were all building up big social media audiences. We'd found this like attention arbitrage. And funnily enough, we were all on pretty much the same street in Manchester. So Lad Bible, like Uni Lad, Jungle Creations, and our business Media Chain or Social Chain was all in the same, within sort of a couple of hundred meters of each other. Started Wallpark, discovered this attention arbitrage on social media that you could build hundreds of millions of followers very, very easily. And in the death of my business, I was trying to persuade my investors that this social media thing was interesting. They thought it was a waste of time. I left the company, took the social media pages with me, and that formed a new business, which was social media. And as I reflect on that, the really interesting thing that I would tell to my future kids someday is you want to go fall off a surfboard that's coming into shore in your life. What I mean by that is the social media wave was coming into shore, more so than I think I could have forecasted. But social media was going to be really important in the future, in the same way that AI is coming into shore now as well. And as a young person, and remember I said it's all about the acquisition of knowledge and skills, you want to go, the surfboard in my analogy is the company you work for. You want to go fall off a small surfboard. You want to go fail in a startup that is building something that's coming into shore, because the knowledge you acquire by doing that will set you up for the next 10, 20 years. I failed in social media in 2013, 2014. And that meant that after Wallpark, when the business was basically done, I'd left it, carried on going for a while, per month I was making about £80,000 as a consultant, traveling the world, to San Francisco working with Michael Birch, the founder of Bebo, to London, living my best life because I'd failed at something that the world suddenly cared about. And I had more knowledge than 99% of people in that thing. And then one of my clients turned around to me one day and said, "Do you want to turn it into a business?" I said no, because I was loving my life. I was in Sao Paulo for the World Cup. I was in Thailand for 3 months. Then I changed my mind and I just got that hunger back to start something and build something. I took a massive pay cut. He gave me a $300,000 check. He was one of our big clients at the time. And we took it downstairs to NatWest at the bank, paid it in. And that's when Social Chain was born, which was twisted and turned. Started as a marketing business, got to about 25 million in revenue. Then this German came in, basically invested in the business and took a majority position, bought out my original investor, the one I mentioned, took a 60% position, and then turned it into a Social Chain group. And then my job was to go around the world acquiring companies. So from San Diego to Berlin, we would go around the world acquiring agencies, e-commerce companies, and rolling them into this roll-up, which became Social Chain, went public. I quit in 2020.
And how old were you then?
I was 27 when I quit, in the middle of the pandemic, and really because I'd lost control of the thing. So I'd lost control of my ability I was the internal and external face of the company, but the control that I had over the decisions I no longer had enough control over the decisions. My leverage was I could kick off to the board, and I didn't like that. And I thought, I'm young, I'm relatively young in the arc of my career. I know more than ever before. And this is kind of the paradox of being a founder, because especially a young founder, when you take investment and you bring people on, you know very little, and you really, really need them. But as the business grows, you know more, and you probably need them less. But as the business grows, you have less control. So I think young founders typically have to jump ship and start again on their own so that they can get the control back that they now are capable of using. So I jumped ship at 27, in the middle of the pandemic. One promise I made to myself, which was that I'm gonna not to label myself. Because it's very easy at any stage in your career that if you've been successful at something to self-label. I am now a social media entrepreneur. I am now a CEO. And that's great, because when you introduce yourself at parties, people get you, and we want to be understood. And it's great to have something in your bio and a way to introduce someone on stage. But I think it narrows you in a way that's not useful, because you're all multifaceted. Like some of you love DJing, art, baking, marketing, AI, and Manchester United. But when you label, that label doubles up as an instruction manual for what you do in the future. And sometimes just because you're good at something doesn't necessarily mean it's the thing that's gonna light you up. So I said to myself, right, back to zero, remove all labels and see what catches your heart. So first thing I did is I went and worked in the psychedelics industry and mental health. I started working in loads of different biotech firms as an investor, creative director. Some of them went public, which was exciting. Started a fund, started a podcast weekly called The Diaries of a CEO, wrote some books, started DJing, did a musical theatrical show, which I wrote and produced that toured the UK. Joined Dragon's Den, which was fun. Started a fund, started a software business in San Francisco called Third Web, which is our software company. We've raised about $30 million, and many other things, Huel, Zoe, Whoop, et cetera, et cetera.
So you definitely didn't narrow yourself down and label
yourself. I tried
yourself.
not to, and I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad that I tried to throw myself into discomfort.
You mentioned the Diary of a CEO podcast. Over not very many years, you've managed to get so many different people on, from...
Your dad?
My dad, yes, he was on it. And you've had spies on there, you've had neuroscientists on there. Do you think there's a common thread between all these weird and wacky and wonderful people that have all done seriously brilliant things in their lives? Or do you think everyone is different?
They're all different, but I think there are some threads. And I think in pretty much all the cases, anyone that sits on the show probably was willing to do something irrespective of return or remuneration for many, 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 many years without anybody clapping for them whatsoever. And then typically their career at some point compounded. And it's actually the same as the Diary of a CEO as a podcast, because if you look at the graph, for 3 years, nobody's listening. And then in year 3.5, the graph just goes directly upwards. And you remember some of those big moments. Molly May, Matt Hancock. These were just some of the big moments that set the graph. And then I joined Dragon's Den around that time. But I think that's a common thread, is most of us, because we only see the sort of end point, aren't willing to go through the embarrassing, low return phase of being really, really bad at something. I had a lady come up to me on the weekend when I was out with my girlfriend in the Apple store. And she was like, Steve, I need you to say something to me that will help me start this podcast. And I said, how long have you been thinking about it? She was like, 2 years. And actually, in that procrastination, what's happening is she's just avoiding the discomfort associated with being really bad at something at the start. And everyone I interview, whether it's, or you see doing interviews, whether it's Ed Sheeran or your dad or anybody, the Google CEO who I had on the podcast yesterday, they were all prepared to be really bad at the thing for a long period of time. And I remember the first time I put something out there in the world that was my idea. I remember so clearly how embarrassed I felt amongst my friendship group to post a quote of myself on my own Instagram. Like, what kind of narcissist do you have to be to post your own quote on your Instagram? Imagine, you kind of get it now. If I post something now, people are like, oh, that's cool, whatever. But imagine day one, where you're with the boys, and then you're like, everything happens for a reason. And you quote yourself saying it. It's humiliating. And I heard people talking shit about me, but it was very much in line with who I actually was. This idea of sharing ideas and learning things myself and sharing them. It was who I was. So because of that, I weathered the storm of criticism, and it changes your life. It puts you exactly where you need to be. But most people don't want to do that.
But most people also don't realise that that's the journey you have to take. I think young people nowadays often think they see all the fame and the people doing really good things on social media, and they think it comes like that. They don't realise the hard graft that has to go behind it. Is there any of the people you've interviewed that have really shifted your perspective on business or on life?
Honestly, every single person that I've interviewed has shifted my perspective. Whether it's a sex expert, or whether it's the CIA agent, or Boris Johnson, whoever it is, they all add something to this sort of jigsaw puzzle in your head. Mo Gawdat's one that I always reference because that was a really profound episode for me. It was episode 101, ex-head of Google X, son dies in a routine operation, quits Google, his high-flying job, divorces his wife, and just basically becomes a nomad at the age of maybe 50 years old, and tries to figure out what makes you happy in your life, goes on this search of happiness. And one of the things he said, which has always stayed with me, but I love sharing it because it's everywhere, every day for all of us, is this idea that happiness is when your expectations of how your life is supposed to be going are met. And if you think about your life, if you think about where I came from in Botswana, watching my mother have a bowl of jollof rice caused apparent euphoria. But if you go to Mayfair and a billionaire steak doesn't come medium rare like they asked, you see anger. What's the difference? The difference is unmet or met expectations. In fact, all of our lives, our relationships, the argument you're having at home with your partner is all about whether your expectations of how they were going to show up, and I can see some of you smirking, are exceeded or fell below. And it's the story of my life. The last 10 years of my life have changed a lot. Like, I didn't get on a plane, other than flying from Botswana, until I was about 23 years old. And you can imagine the first time I got on the plane, how mind blown I was that this tin can was going to try and fly to Thailand. Like, staggered. And then now, when I get on, I'm flying to Kuwait, I think tomorrow, first class, whatever, I'll run on the plane, get on my laptop, they'll tell me I have to put the laptop away, and I'll be totally oblivious to the fact that I am sat at 32 years old on a plane in first class, and they're asking if I want caviar and Dom Perignon. And it's just all, and I remember the day, which I referenced early in the podcast, where a lady got on the plane with me when I was flying 50 weeks a year, running the New York office, and it was clearly her first time being in business class, and I watched vicariously her reaction, the whole like, oh my God, and she's like going through the safety manual and nudging her husband Dave, and oh my God, Dom Perignon, she's swinging, and I'm looking over at her and going, oh my God, that used to be me. But what happened? My expectations of my own life changed, and out the door with it went my happiness. And so what this says to you is you can control at least one element of your happiness, which is your own expectation management. This is why Buddhists preach about gratitude, because what does gratitude do? It reminds you that your expectations of your life are currently being exceeded right now. Dreams you once had are today. This is it. This is a dream you used to have. Having this job, being here, doing this. It's a dream you used to have. But we're so far off into the head thinking of the next dream that it's creating this expectation delta, which is making us unhappy. And that was useful as a manager, especially because much of the reason why your team members get unhappy is because they have unmet expectations. As a boyfriend, much of the reason why my partner might be unhappy with me is because of unmet expectations, or no expectations, unclear expectations, or even worse, because then she has one in her head, and I had one of what I was going to be doing at midnight on Monday night, and she had cuddles and movie night, and we never vocalized them, so it's unmet. So yeah.
Well, you talk a lot about mental health and happiness within your book, and I think it's so important when leaders talk about the struggles that they're going through. I think it's really great for leaders to be vulnerable. And you talked about imposter syndrome, about burnout, about the anxieties that you had. And thank you so much for sharing all of that, because I think it's so important that you can be that role model to others, that it's okay. It's okay to not be okay. Would you mind talking about some of those challenges that you've had and your thoughts about that power of showing vulnerability?
Yeah, I mean, on the point of vulnerability, I think it's great for others, but it's like even better for you. It's one of the things that I learned from doing the Diary of a CEO, where in those early episodes, it was me sharing my diary and reflecting on what I'd gone through that week in my own diary and trying to, from a bird's eye view, build my self-awareness by like analyzing it on paper. It's really hard to build self-awareness like of yourself, but when you put it out on paper and you can look down on it and you can see why you reacted in that way and why you felt like that and this issue you're contending with, it solved for most of the problems I had. Most of the big problems, like relationship problems, where I was avoiding women up until like 26, 27 years old. If I pursued a woman and then she showed any interest in me, I would immediately dissuade her from any kind of relationship with me. And as I reflected on that on my diary, I could see the pattern. I could see that that's the exact feeling I had when I was a kid, when I watched my mother and father at war. I thought my father was in prison. So every time a woman asked me for commitment, it was like me signing up to go to prison in my head. And realizing that helped me to escape it and have a relationship, which I've been in for six years now. As it relates to mental health, everybody, what I've come to learn as a leader is that like everybody has mental health, and we all have a different depth that we should and can swim at before we feel different signals from our mental health that there might be something missing. And this is the way that I think about all things now, especially my mental health. I see it as a signal. So if I'm anxious, if something's happened and I'm getting anxious, it's a signal of something. If you're feeling lonely, it's a signal hardwired into you to get back to your tribe. I understand that there's such immense suffering associated with mental health for a lot of people, but for me, I operate in this interesting space where I'm constantly trying to create a space where I can listen to myself and then understand what the signal is that life is giving me and try and readjust rapidly. That only actually happened at about 25 years old. Before then, I didn't experience anything like anxiety. But at 25 years old, then I started getting anxious because I was running a big business and it was high stakes. You have to appreciate that your life is in these seasons. So there might be a season where your needs are slightly out of balance, and that's okay. The first sort of chapter of my career was like all out war. It was really like, get out of here. And then the second season was build strong relationships. And then this season of life is really about being a dad. So thinking a lot about my future kids. Yeah.
That's exciting. What's also exciting is you wrote a book. And we're here to talk about this today, Diary of a CEO. If you haven't read it, I really, really highly recommend reading it. I'm not going to go into all the detail of the book right now because we don't want to ruin the storyline. But would be really good if we could just get the gist of the 4 sections that you write about in here. You've got the self, the story, the philosophy, and the team. And then you've got the laws under each section. But it would just be lovely to hear why you came up with those 4 overarching topics.
I did my best to try and make it applicable to everybody. And I started with the self because I felt like you are ultimately the most important thing. Like everything thereafter is downstream from you being able to understand the most important factors of you. And the first law in the book is about kind of what I was talking about, the idea that you have 5 buckets, everybody does in this room. And bucket number 1 is your knowledge. And when you apply bucket number 1, you get skills. Now, the really critical thing, especially when you're making career decisions, is to know that these 2 buckets can never be unspilled. No one can ever take away your knowledge and skills. Bucket number 3, your resources, your network, and your reputation will fluctuate. You will have career earthquakes. You will lose your job, get fired, be made redundant. But the thing that becomes your longevity, as you reflect on my story of getting so much knowledge and skills when I was 14, is these 2 things. And my peace of mind when I quit that job at 27 years old, or when I dropped out of university, came from the fact that I knew those 2 first buckets were really full. So when you're young, you should be thinking about your career choices, not through the lens of who's going to give me the most resources, who's going to give me the most reputation, ego, job title, or even a lot of it's like not just about who the cool people you're going to get to hang around with. It should be through the lens of knowledge and skills. That's the long-term way to play life. In the second section of the book, which is about story, which is really about storytelling and marketing, which is the essence of the fundamental game we're all playing all the time, whenever we're speaking to people. Just gives a bunch of hacks around how to think about storytelling. And one of my favorite, which is I think law 13, is about how useless absurdity will define you more than useful practicality. What I mean by that is as a business, and your dad knows this better than fucking anyone, because he's like the founder and CEO of this idea, basically, is that the most absurd thing you do will say more about you than everything else that you say. And if you think about the story of Virgin and all those stunts that Richard did back in the day with the hot air balloons and everything, that said more about who Virgin are and what they believe and their personality than any press release. And in our business back in the day, we had a massive blue slide in the office. Worst business decision I ever made financially. Before we had desks, I spent £13,000 on a massive blue slide and a ball pool. I was 21 years old. That's what you do at 21 years old. Terrible decision, but of all the marketing stunts we ever did, nothing in our business ever drew more attention to our company and told you exactly who we were. We were disruptive, we were young, we were different than that blue slide. And every journalist that came to the office in the 6-7 years that I ran the business had one request. Can you go and lay in the ball pool? And it defined our business. I go, it's the best marketing thing we ever did. The most absurd thing you do, especially if it's inefficient, says more about you and your business than anything you do. So it's those kind of laws in the whole section about story, just thinking about storytelling and brand differently. And then I have to say my favorite subject is just this in the second section, which is about, in the third section, is about just failure and experimentation. Because the world is changing so unbelievably quickly that I think you can measure much of the success of a company, a team, or an individual in your life and career by your personal and collective rate of failure. Because failure is feedback. Feedback is knowledge and knowledge is power. If there's like business challenges you're trying to solve for now, how to launch a podcast, how to launch a YouTube channel, how to get 1 million followers on a Virgin account, my primary piece of advice for you in a world where things are changing so quickly that the correct answer is going to change fast is not to wait on reading a book. Don't read my book. Read the book. Not to wait for some speaker to tell you. It's you have to increase your rate of experimentation. I have a full-time head of failure and experimentation in the podcast. If we do 100 experiments this month, 5 of them will work, but we don't know which 5 they are. So our job isn't to try and to pick our bets, it's to increase our bets. And if anyone asks me anything about any algorithm right now, if you ask me how to get a gazillion followers on LinkedIn, how to build a podcast, my response to you now is going to be increase your rate of experiments by 10. I know every single week how many experiments my team have done in every single company because that team report directly into me. And my job isn't to reward them for the ones that succeed, it's to purely increase the rate of that experimentation. This is not my idea, this is Amazon's idea, this is Booking.com's idea, it's how CEOs for the last 60, 70 years, if you look into their writing, think about it. Jeff Bezos said, 1 in 10 of our experiments will succeed, and that will pay for the graveyard. So we need to be the best place on planet Earth, quote, to fail. That's their game, failure, increase the rate of experimentation. And it can solve for, honestly, everything.
And you must be a big company now. Are you still finding it is possible to keep up that failure rate the bigger you get?
I've had to change things a little bit. I've had to change the structure of so everybody experiments, so it becomes religious in the company, like Will works in the team, Dom works in the team, it's religious. Will knows that if there's ever a challenge that he has with the work he's doing with the videography work here, he's launching some new shows at the company at Flight Studio, I know the first thing Will's going to come to, when he comes to me and talks to me about the ideas, the first thing he's going to say is, because this is what he did recently, we've ran the 37 tests on the format, and we've ran 60 tests on the title. This is what he said to me, we've ran 60 tests on the title, here are the ones that won, what do you think? Because it's religious in our organization, everybody knows. Don't even have a conversation if you've not run the tests yet. And when I say run the tests, I mean, when Richard came on the podcast, we take every sentence he said and we run it as tests. We ran 400 tests on that particular episode, and then our team get back, before the episode is published, we get back a percentage on every single line he said so we can start thinking about the title. The impact of an exclamation mark versus no exclamation mark. What kind of impact would it say if I quote Richard versus just not quoting him? What if I use green instead of red? What's the impact on that? Sounds so trivial that your competitors won't bother. The Mo Gordak conversation I had, I remember his second episode's data off the top of my head, because the worst performing title we tested was 1% click-through, and the best performing title we tested was 20% click-through. The same creative work, the same conversation, but 2,000% difference in who will click, a 2,000% increase from 1% in who will click, just because our team cared enough to run a test. This is our team, this is our religion. Kill the guessing. It makes life easier because you don't have to argue as much. You still get to make the choice, but you're informed, the lights are on, by loads of data. And I will say this on stage, I will give away this on stage, because I know most teams' incentive structures and their cultures, regardless of whether they want to, will not do it. It's hard. It's harder. People don't like things that are harder. So.
Yes, especially when you haven't built it from the beginning, because presumably you've had that from the very beginning and it's just grown and grown with what you do. Trying to superimpose that onto an existing business is much harder, but we will try. We're going to take that away and we'll try. I'm Chief Purpose and Vision Officer of Virgin Group, so I can't end without talking about purpose. Our purpose at Virgin is changing business for good. We really want all businesses across the world to make sure they're doing their best for their people and best for the environment and best for the communities that we're in, and we want to be an inspiration to other companies to do that. But we also realise how important it is for our people to have that purpose to wake up and go to work every day. Do you have any advice for anybody who are struggling to find their own personal purpose, and how you sort of can inspire them to do that, and how it fits with a company that you work with?
Yeah, there's a lot of these sort of questions out there that you're faced with when you're building your career and making decisions. There's these sort of like big life questions. I know this because these are the DMs I get from specifically young people. Have you found your passion? Is it love? Is another big life question that your mum will ask you when you bring someone home. And the issue with all these questions, which is why you need to interrogate the question a lot in your life, is they sound valid, but just because something sounds valid as a question, it doesn't mean it is. What number is fork? You know what numbers are and you know what forks are. So what number is fork? And if you pause for a second and say, maybe the question isn't a great question, like maybe this isn't a valid question, you can go in search of something else. So what is my passion, or what is my purpose in life? Or is this my passion? Comes loaded with assumptions. Typically that there's one of them. Unhelpful assumption, you've kind of lost before you've started, because you're going in search for the big thing, the one thing. Instead of thinking, do you know what, I like DJing, I'm interested in psychedelics, whatever, you know? And then found, or have you found, means that it's something you've got to go searching for. Like I've got to go on like an Easter egg hunt to find this thing, and there's one of them, and it's fucking really important. So what I, like with these questions, I try and really analyze the question for truth. And when I came home with Melanie and my mum was like, is it love? I was like, I love peanut butter, I love my French bulldog. Maybe I should be using a different set of words in that case, which is like, how do you feel about Melanie? Nice question. Allows for the full expression of my feelings. So on the purpose question, the first thing I'd like you to appreciate is that you all have many purposes. Being a dog mum or a cat mum is a purpose. And they'll come in different shapes and sizes. You probably won't be able to find it if you're not conducting more experiments. Most people don't know what their purpose is because they've frankly just not ran enough personal experiments in their life to try a bunch of stuff. They don't quit fast enough either, which is a big one. You need to quit fast. You need to say yes, have a bias towards yes, but then quit quickly. And then I think it's just really important to know that your purpose is going to be completely different to the person sat next to you, even if you work in the same company. This is really a message for leaders. There are 5 things I want in my life and my career. This is why I've been able to work across multiple industries. A sense of forward motion, I call this the progress principle. Sir David taught me this when he was in the English cycling team, but Harvard Business Review have studied people and found that their best days in work are days when you have a feeling of progress, even if it's a 1% feeling. You need to feel challenged. In game psychology, they say that your skill level has to be slightly below the challenge you face. And anyone in my company at any moment, if I go up to them and say, this is point 3, where are we going and why does it matter to you? If they don't have a good answer for me, I think they'll quit within 6 months or we'll have a conversation. Where are we going? And if we get there, why does it matter to you, Jenny? And if she can give me a good answer, then I go, she's gonna stay. And that's the point of subjective meaning. Number 4 is autonomy, very, very important. And number 5, maybe the most important of all, is working with people that you like. Because if you have the other 4, but you don't have the last one, and you're working with arseholes, it's still a shit job. So, yeah. I
love that, all of that, thank you. You have done so much, from the book to podcasts to investing. You've had incredible work you've done with disadvantaged kids. You've worked with Prince William to try and tackle homelessness. What's next for you?
Good question. We're building a media company. That's the most important thing I think about every day. We have this 25,000 square foot HQ now down at, in Shoreditch. We're building studios. We want to build a really incredible media company that drives a happier, healthier humanity. So lots of new shows and lots of things on that front. And then on the other side, my fund has launched. So Flight Fund, investing in early stage entrepreneurs. And those are the 2 things I think about. Building better, healthier media and inspiring the next generation of great founders and entrepreneurs.
Well done, and thank you for inspiring all of us.